Melissa LaCasse is behind one of the favorite stories I've run into since starting Maine for Keeps. This is a lady who was a success at WNYC Public Radio in New York City for years and years. For those of you who haven't had the pleasure of listening, WNYC makes Maine Public look like Breitbart News. But thank God she found and fell in love with Christopher LaCasse, came to Maine and started a family. They also started together a company called Tanbark. You see, Christopher LaCasse is the LaCasse of LaCasse and Weston, the company that builds all of the equipment to turn pulp into paper at our mills in Maine. Now that industry's flattening out, but Christopher's technology is not. Combined with Melissa's marketing prowess, Christopher and Melissa in Tanbark are taking on the styrofoam and plastic packaging industry, replacing the sandwich boxes and cups and wrappers that we see with cool, gorgeous, water-resistant, Maine pulp-built packaging. Melissa and Christopher LaCasse and Tanbark are shining hope for the future of Maine. I'm Jonathan Bush, and this is Maine for Keeps. I feel like we first met when Maine and Company was trying to put together options for financing your creative combo of companies and couples.
Yes, that's probably right. We were trying to figure out, should we combine companies? Should we keep them separate? What kind of people would be interested in investing in our companies?
It's a really interesting, first of all, it's too bad we don't have Christopher. It's actually a relief we don't have Christopher on, because we wouldn't get a word in edgewise with chatty you and me. But LaCasse and Weston is a legendary Maine institution, building the technology that makes the paper that makes our last barely surviving economic complex here with our raw materials. And Tanbark is this sassy, new agey, kind of in the height of the zeitgeist company. Tell us about, let me not characterize. You tell us what Tanbark is.
So Tanbark really came out of the fact that our family company for over 30 years has dealt with the pulp and paper industry. And in the last 15 years is really focused on molded fiber, which is taking plant fiber and molding it into shapes. And they have a particular specialty with recycled fiber or virgin wood fiber. So molded fiber has 3 different types, typically, just generally speaking. Type 1 is like the garden pot that you get at a nursery, or sometimes coolers are made out of type 1. They're really thick and dusty. Type 2 is an egg carton or a 4-cup carrier, very industrial type packaging. And type 3, your iPhone comes in type 3. A lot of takeout and food service items are now starting to come in type 3. And
the Luke lobster roll box.
Yep, that's what Tanbark does. So about 5 years ago, LaCasse and Weston started getting calls from companies begging them to sell them a machine because they couldn't get access to type 3. And molded fiber is not like plastic. You can't really plug a machine in and hit go. It's a complex process that has a lot of different inputs. You pull one string, it changes everything. So we realized we had to build some pretty innovative equipment that allowed for low volume access. And so we started a company called Tanbark. And we're located in Saco, Maine, and we're basically, simply put, we're providing access to companies that want to replace their single-use plastic with type 3 molded fiber.
Which is so sexy, right, in this day and age.
It totally is.
A wonderful industrial idea for Maine, right?
Yes, because it's really taking this legacy industry. I call it ancient future technology. So the type 3 process was invented in Maine over 100 years ago.
To do what?
The type 3 process? I think it started with egg cartons. Christopher would know. Ask him. He knows the history really, really well. But the type 3 process started it was patented in Maine over 100 years ago. And in the 50s and 60s, it kind of just parked itself when that really carbon heavy technology of plastic came along. Plastic can do a lot, it's super convenient. And so, what's really interesting about what Tanbark is doing and LaCasse and Weston is we're taking this ancient technology and we're dusting it off and trying to innovate it into the 21st century. And yeah, it is sexy. People are really into it. But what's great about starting this company in Maine is we check a lot of boxes. We're not only like great for the environment, plastic, just the findings about it coming out, just I have to sound like sometimes I worry I sound like a conspiracy theorist with a tin hat on. It's so bad. Um, but molded fiber is this great replacement for it, but it's really, really stuck in the 50s. So we have to innovate with that. It's great for Maine because it's creating new markets for the pulp and paper industry, which has been decimated in recent years. We have legacy knowledge here. But also it's just really fantastic for the environment. We're a very ocean-based state, and the waterways and woods are very prevalent here, and plastic is having a decimating effect. So it's really relevant, Tanbark is, for the state of Maine on a number of different levels.
And what's it like being in? So, first of all, does your supply actually come down from Maine? You're early, so it's not like you're having 50 tractor trailers a day. But I would have thought if supply was an issue, you wouldn't have chosen Saco. Was that because of business environment or?
So we chose Saco because at the time that we were looking, we really wanted to start a company, which was a little bit out of the norm at the time. We were raising money to start a company and not raise 50 million, but raise like 2 million to start a manufacturing company. We wanted to take theories, prove it into fact, then raise more, prove it into fact. We're starting to get to an inflection point where I think it's time to stop that organic growth and go big. But the reason we chose Saco is because it's a great community. We're in the industrial park here. So the workforce is actually really well suited to work at Tanbark, and we're not having trouble filling jobs, but we're also close to that raw feedstock, the pulp and paper industry. And it does come from Maine. We're pretty small, so we're still going through a distributor. But the paper companies do know about us and they are keeping an eye on us because we are poised to open up like a 50-ton-a-day facility at least as our next move.
Nice. And so obviously Maine, the know-how, which you also married, that helps. Because this depends on we should talk briefly about the twist in the technology story, right? So Tanbark, there's a zeitgeist twist, which is Jesus Christ, all our shit is coming in poison that we didn't know was poison. We thought it was just cheap. So we want to pack our stuff, whether it's our lobster rolls or our iPhones, in something that isn't poison. So that's the marketing story. But then to make a piece of wood into a piece of doing a plastic-like job.
Yep.
Talk about that.
Talk about the process and
you
kind of what we're doing with it.
Grind it down, and then you end up with a beautiful Luke's Lobsters,
Yeah.
no longer styrofoam with a cute little lobster on it.
Yeah, I actually really like this story. So, you take first of all, let's talk about the fact that we're starting at Tanbark, we're using virgin wood fiber. And I like to address this because I think instinctually people think it's bad to cut down a tree. And in Maine, we sustainably harvest our wood. There's a couple of things going into that. I think Maine is over 80%, almost 90% forested. Most of it's privately held. And that forest needs economic utilization for it to be continuing to be forest. And so what we're doing is the product that goes into our raw feedstock starts out as that low value, those low value parts of a sawmill tree. So the branches, the stumps, the leaves, the low value trees around the sawmill tree. The sawmill tree grows, you cut it down, you take out all the low value product around it, you provide full economic utilization of the tree, and the sawmill tree is a carbon capture. And then you grow it again. And a working forest is the best carbon capture machine in the world. If I could invent a carbon capture machine with the metrics of a working forest, I would have, every VC fund in the world would be knocking on my door. It's amazing. So I do have this whole other side conversation I'd love to have sometime about how do we attract investment into the companies that are pumping the engine of the working forest, because that would be really great for the climate. So we start with the sustainably harvested forest that is just fantastic for carbon capture, because growing trees capture a ton of carbon. New forests are also really, really strong habitats for a lot of endangered species. And so you need those new forests regenerating. But then you're providing full economic utilization of the forest. It's good for the loggers. It's good for the landowners. So you keep the forest forests. All right, so we go there. It goes into the paper mill. The paper mill turns it into what we call market pulp, dry lap. So it looks like rough paper, basically. What they're doing is they're taking the tree and pulling the fibers apart and, doing all sorts of chemical processes with the tree. But they end up with the fibers being pressed together. We bring it into our facility, these flat sheets of paper. They're hardwood and softwood, and we repulp them. We get them agitated with water, basically, and we're teasing apart the fibers again. And what we're doing is we're putting it through a process by which we're using vacuum, we're using encapsulated drying, and we're using pressure. A tree is held together. The fibers of the tree are held together by a naturally occurring adhesive, a naturally occurring glue. And what God's glue. Oh, I'm going to use that. And what we're doing is we're basically recreating that chemical structure so that we get God's glue. But the form is just different. So you're basically at the most simple level recreating very naturally that bond that holds the tree together in the shape you want and in the finish you want.
And you basically, I love going through that plant. You get this, you make your muck, and then instead of laying it down on a big, huge, making just a great big dumb sheet of paper, you trick it into these little dies, like a stamping machine. But a stamping machine, at least you've got a piece of metal. You're tricking these fibers to hold together, and then you, instead of stamp them, you suck them dry against these shapes, and then out comes this beautiful new creation out of wood.
Yeah, it's really cool. We suck them to the point where they're in the shape they're at, and then we put them through a process called encapsulated drying, which is where you start to get that type 3 finish. And then we press them so that we can emboss them or make them look really beautiful, or they can have a texture. One of the things that we're working on is we have financing from a number of different sources, a lot of them from the state of Maine. We aren't bankable, but we were able to get non-dilutive financing because of the fact that we're creating new markets in the pulp and paper industry. And Maine has a lot of really great funding sources set up for that. So our Gen 2 machines that we'll be putting in that we're financing through these programs, you're going to just, Jonathan, you came in here and saw the first ones. You're going to love these second ones. They're amazing. They're faster. They're smaller, and they use 20% of the energy of our first machines.
Fabulous.
Yes.
So what's it like being a business person in Maine? I guess you've only ever been a business person in Maine, so you got because your history's you're a marketer, right? You're a public radio star.
Yeah, well, that was in New York. It wasn't in Maine. So I do have experience outside of Maine. I worked for New York Public Radio for almost a decade. And before that was in public media. But what I did in public media was really consortium building. So I really have, if I was to say I had a superpower, it would be in figuring out projects that solve a lot of different stakeholders' goals, and their goals aren't the same, but they all get solved in that one project. And by having that diversity of motivation, it feels like it's a lot easier to get successful things done. So I took that skill set and applied it to starting Tanbark here in Maine. I should say Christopher and I knew a lot about B2B sales. We knew a lot about business development. We knew a lot about molded fiber. We didn't know anything about capital stack. And so we started with baby steps. We did.
Thank God, because I got to meet you.
Yes, right. That's right. We came to you, and I still have so many other questions about Capital Stack now that we're growing. So hopefully we get a chance for me to ask some of that in this conversation. But um, we really, found that starting in Maine was like so different than being in New York or some larger environment because people answered our phone calls and people were willing to open up their Rolodex and introduce us to other people. And I say that Maine has a delegation that punches above its weight. It has pretty pragmatic politicians for the most part. And it was a type of thing where we could both really create a project in Tanbark that solved a lot of goals for a lot of different people, including the state of Maine, in a bipartisan way. So we had support from, everybody basically. So access
Yeah, it's
to.
hard to imagine people being against replacing plastic with wood.
So
Uh,
that's the other thing about Tanbark is our salesperson started here a few months ago, and he said he's never worked for a company where everybody wants you to win, which is funny.
I think that makes sense. I love those. I'm putting those on the good column. That it's true about Maine. They call you back or prospectively email to say hi,
Yes,
which is,
totally. It's
you
amazing.
know, you're like, whoa, hey, what are you doing?
Yes, yes. What do you want?
Why
So.
why is this person being so nice?
Hmm. Yep.
It's once you get over the disbelief, it's quite lovely.
Yes, it is. Yep.
And the delegation, I think that's right. With a small state, you can call them.
Yep. You can. And Susan Collins is the chair of the Appropriations Committee. Like that's a pretty big, powerful position, and Angus King holds a lot of sway. So I'm not saying that that delivers money to Tanbark, but that gravitas makes it so the state of Maine is getting things that we need as an economy to help grow businesses in it. So it's been good.
What's on the other side of the ledger for you? What is in the way? Like, why aren't I always seeing Tanbark everywhere yet? Because this is so obvious. It's so good. What? And it's not like, oh, sorry, we got too much other things to do with the wood pulp. With two plants left in the whole state. What are the blockers?
Sure. So manufacturing is really hard. And I would say
It
you
is
would see
hard. That's a
Tamra.
good one.
It's so hard. And what I would say is there's a few things holding things back right now. One is access to capital. I sometimes wish that we knew more than we did when we started in terms of capital stack because I might have raised a lot more money a lot sooner. Um, because it almost seems easier right now to raise 50 million than 5. And I think that's because the paperwork is hard and it's the same for both kinds of deals, but also there's a lot of money in the world and it's sometimes very concentrated and they want to make big bets. So if you can show them big moves, we've always planned to do a larger raise. That's the next one. So maybe that's just part of the process. I had to get ready for it. But that's one thing. The other is we were so happy to meet with you because there's just not a lot of access to people who have networks that write that kind of check sizes in Maine. So it's really great on the angel side, really great in that 250 to 500K range. You get above that, and like we want someone to write a $2.5 million check that's a strategic partner who can help us with that massive growth we're about to do. It's much harder to find in that network in Maine. There's just not those check sizes here. So that's one thing. The second thing is manufacturing is really hard, and we have found that the equipment and the equipment and the technology is starting to get us where we need to be, but it's still not quite there. So we can't.
Is that because we're just out of the habit of making industrial equipment? I mean, where do you get your actual equipment made?
So we get it made in the US. And it's a lot of the people that are making our machines are 60, right? Like it's starting to age. Christopher is in his 40s and he is a baby in molded fiber. It's very unusual to find someone with his He's been turning wrenches on these machines since he was 13. So that's incredibly unusual to find, his age, but also the fact that he apprenticed at this job as such a young person. But it's more that the tooling is hard. So we were getting our tooling from China, and what we found is it could be communication, it could just be um, a cultural, but we're finding that like wanting to move fast and innovate on the tooling side, we're running into like pushback from our suppliers, and we are starting to figure out how do we bring that stateside so we can speed it up, because mistakes are going to get made, and when mistakes are going to get made, we need to iterate quickly because
Our tooling is made in China, just so people, the
yes,
tooling is the last bit of the machine. It's the business end that
correct.
is shaping, it's the piece of metal that makes a million lobster boxes, that's lobster, it's an inverse lobster box or whatever. Is that right?
Yeah, so if you think about it, it's the skew, right? The different shapes. So we have Luke's Lobster has 4 different products they get from us. All of them are shaped differently, and the tooling is what is that specific shape, and it plugs into the machine. We're trying to innovate with 3D printing. Um, we're trying to do metal 3D printing. We're trying to do plastic 3D printing to do prototyping. And then also we're getting our tools currently from China, but likely we're working on bringing that stateside because we need to iterate quickly, and we just got to go faster. And so some
Especially
of it
when you're
is
moving from the big dumb product, a giant wad of
yes,
paper to, I need 10,000 of these and I need 5,000 of these and I need 30,000 of these. And each one is a totally different shape, design, etc.
nobody has figured out how to do this in molded fiber yet, and we're doing it at this little shop in Maine, right? It's the draw, it's the depth. And so we're doing this for a client, but you think about this is maybe why you haven't seen Tanbark's products everywhere. And this might be the advice I give to everybody. There's so many reasons, but one would be we took on a really hard project really early. The name is super big. It's a big brand name. It was kind of they found us because they know how badly they need to get out of PLA line paper and also plastic. But in retrospect, it's going to be something that we can map across a ton of different technologies that we figured this out. But we were really young to take this on, right? So we needed successes, easy successes. And I wonder sometimes, would it have been better for us to just do easy stuff? I don't think so. That's not how we're built. We're kind of a skunk workshop. But, when we're successful with this is going to be a game changer in molded fiber. So hopefully that'll be within the next couple weeks. We're at you run a mile, it's the last little bit that's the hardest. But so that's one of the reasons. And then the other is I feel like companies are slow. They know they have to get out of this, but they're just slower to move right now. They especially in places where I think Europe is about 10 years ahead of us. So companies that do business in Europe understand that the regulations are coming. And so they know they have to start working on it now. I do think in business, there's a lot of companies that are working on a lot of different things and they just don't have their eye on this. And it's going to hit them over the head because there's not going to be capacity because all the early adopters will have all the capacity. So there's going to be this point where access to this material will get hard just because there's not capacity. And then that'll even it out and the late adopters will get access to it, but they'll be taxed and fined along the way. We had a brand that's pretty big. They own a lot of different products that are in everybody's house. Tell us they mapped out the EU regulations against their book of business in the United States, and it was 50 million per year. So it's not something to sniff at, and they know it's coming. So I don't know if I made sense on any of that. I was rambling a little, but
What do you wish was different about Maine? You are literally the prototypical dream Maine business. So the world wants you to win. What else needs to happen? It sounds like one thought is, boy, it would be nice if there was more of a business complex here and a financial investment complex. That there's the one state fund. Here's $50 million. There's the RU. Have you been involved in the RU?
yeah. So the RU actually, I'll answer that the first question you had second. So the RU, let's talk about that. So the Rue, when we were just starting out, you know, I a pattern of items kept happening, a pattern of events kept happening that really started to allow for this idea to start Tanbark to germinate. And there was just one day that I decided, okay, we're going to do this. And so I started to meet with two people at Maine Venture Fund. You know, they had said to me, we don't just invest in companies. You're probably too early for us. We also offer advice. And so, you know, I'm a pushy person. And I said, great, every Tuesday at 2. So I don't think they expected that, but basically I met with them once a week to just start grilling them on how do you raise capital? How does it look? How do you do it? You know, I understand you need discipline and rigor. What does that look like in terms of documents and due diligence? And really just started asking tons and tons of questions. And then, you know, I was sitting there with them one day and they said, you know, the Rue Institute is starting this fellowship program where they take entrepreneurs and you can go into a year-long fellowship and they'll basically coach you through this stuff for a year. And I said, yeah, I saw that. I'm going to apply for it. And they said, well, it's due. And I said, yeah, next week. And they said, no, it's due at like 10 o'clock tonight. So I went home. I was in my Wisconsin sweatshirt. I went to the University of Wisconsin and I just did like a really flippant iPhone video. Like, you know, companies want to take this plastic and replace it with this molded fiber, and we got to help them do it. And so the Rue Institute accepted Tanbark into their second class. I think we were their second year of doing it. And that was phenomenal in terms of offering, you know, just advice on how to start a business and raise money. We knew how to run a business, but in terms of starting a business and taking on investment, that was new. How to build your pitch, the storytelling behind that. But also, they just gave us credibility. And so at the time when I was raising money, it was just really great to have the Rue Institute and Northeastern University at our back. And then David Rue himself was really great in terms of advice and all the, you know, leadership at the Rue. So the access to just the brain trust there was phenomenal. Yeah. In terms of what I would change, I think you were asking me what would I like Maine to have if I could wave a magic
That's
wand?
right. What do we need next? There is no economic complex right now. And you know, you're like the unicorn. I mean, an industrial use of wood that fits exactly in the pulp making mold. I mean, holy Moses, you know, cue the magical music. But even you, like, it's not capitalized. What do we need to do to make this the best place for a business to make it?
So I think that the seeds are there. And so there's a really great support if you're starting a company on the angel side and in the smaller sort of investment side. What I've been starting to just socialize in the community here is we need more resources for companies that are in the so-called valley of death, which is a thing. I didn't know it was a thing until I was in it, where you've proven out market fit. You are, you know, proving out that you have a need for your product. You're showing that the market will buy it. And you just need that last infusion of capital to get you to mid-market and beyond. And I think that's when we met with you. You said that's growth equity. It's small growth equity. And I feel like we need more of that in Maine. We need a lot of it. And there are a lot of companies, because Maine has been so good about getting companies to that valley of death stage. It's now time for them to figure out how do we support companies through the valley of death.
Over. Got it.
Yep. And that's when we'll
earlier,
start to get
said
those
we're
businesses.
not bankable, meaning you don't yet have the assets necessary to do a debt financing.
Right.
So you're just right there on the edge.
Yep. Right. And so we use Finance Authority of Maine, which is a great program to get us through our next expansion. What I tell people for our raise is it's catalytic. We're not raising money to pour concrete. We've taken care of that through non-dilutive sources. We are raising money to hire the staff we need to execute upon the opportunity in our pipeline. And that's a great place to be. I don't have the Rolodex, and I would argue Maine doesn't have the Rolodex to find the people to write those checks, but we're trying. And Jonathan, let me point out, don't you think too, though, that like if more companies get to the valley of death, we then will get that business complex that, I'm from the Twin Cities. There's so many. I took for granted Target, Best Buy, 3M, Cargill. Like those don't just exist everywhere,
LL
Yep.
Bean, IDEX,
Yeah.
Rex,
Yeah. That's it.
LL Bean, IDEX, Rex,
Yep. That's it.
LL Bean. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's the thing that we're focused on is how do we get those complexes? If you think about wood it used to be Silicon Valley. When you think about wooden shipbuilding, like there are buildings at, Princeton and Yale named after families from Tennant's Harbor that were building these, incredible global clippers, right? And then, the steamship, we didn't quite make it over to steel, and paper is an improvement of wood, not quite as sophisticated and GD producing as a ship, but better, And then wood, just wood is less. You represent a step in there, but each of our economic complexes, we seem to have not reinvested. Either our congressional delegation was too good, and they got us funding to not be in pain, or what? Somehow it didn't get reinvested. It's why I find you to be such an interesting story, because yours is such an obvious opportunity for us to have an economic that's bringing technology, manufacturing, and natural resources, and our brand. I mean, it's a eco, Tanbark is an eco of the moment in the zeitgeist brand. You're an NPR person. I mean, this
I know.
what
I came up with it.
factoring ever in history was run by an NPR person?
I like to break the mold.
But not your mold. Those molds never break.
Nope,
They're very reliable.
they will never break. They're very lovely. Well, they break when they're supposed to, which
They
is,
break down. They break down
yes.
and make beautiful soil to grow tomato plants.
Yes, exactly. What I often say is I wish that the zeitgeist that we're in now was 20 years earlier, when we still had these pulp and paper mills and we were at this inflection point. So that would have been great. So one thing I point out is, that infrastructure, some of it still exists. We don't want to necessarily take over an old pulp mill and redo it, but we do want to tie into that infrastructure if it makes sense. There's a lot of that infrastructure still there. I mean, if I could get aspirational with you, a molded fiber mill. All right. So a molded fiber mill to take trees and make them into the raw material that you need for molded fiber. Right now, what we're using is over processed for molded fiber. So if we had a situation where we could,
right, you're sort of doing it twice, right? Because you make the paper and then you unmake it and then you.
Yep. But we can also, this is more of a CRISPR conversation, but I think that the fibers themselves are somewhat more than we need. And so to build a pulp mill, like a pulp and paper mill, is, 1.5 billion. I'm just going to throw that out there. A molded fiber mill would be like 300 million, right? So it wouldn't be this massive project. 300 million is still a lot, but that's a lot more. You can get your hands around that. So if we had the ability to kind of take the infrastructure of an old mill site, turn it into a place that you could bring in the trees for the pulp and paper mill, but now it's for molded fiber, you'd have a situation where it would be a game changer in molded fiber. We also have the ability to do plants that are heated with wood. So there's all sorts of things you can do to really take advantage of the raw material that's here and that's regenerative, that you can regrow, to make it even better for the state of Maine, and really have that. Maine used to be the center of innovation in molded fiber. Everything you see that is made out of molded fiber in the world started in Maine. Everything. And we're really looking forward to figuring out how to make that way again.
Have you yet looked into building such a thing, or are you too early? That's just a theoretical.
No, we've looked into, we've gotten beyond theoretical, where we have partners that we could do it with, because you definitely need someone who knows how to build the pulp mill at that point. And then sites you could do it at, but and we have the basic high level numbers.
I was
Beyond that,
interested in the sites because
yeah,
I've spoken to a lot of people on this place on this podcast who had a great idea that was good for the environment, and the town was like, no, and then the next town, no, and like, this is the only, someone has to say yes. Someone has to make a mess with a shovel to have there be an industrial complex.
that's the other thing with Maine is sometimes you get the impression that you can't move as fast because just get shit done, right? Like, let's get shit done. And so we haven't run into that really yet, but once we start to really grow, maybe. But there are legacy mill sites where you could put this in.
You could always go to, and then you inherit whatever brownfield,
Yep.
You got to pack a lunch, but at least that way you get through the NIMBYism.
Yes, totally. Yeah.
I do think that's one of the things. The good news is, in Maine, they call you back. The bad news is they call you back to say no.
Yeah, right.
So we want to call you back, and we want to add say yes. And then we'll be in a really good place.
I should say for what Tanbark has had to do for now, we've gotten yeses. What I'm saying is when we
on industrial breaking ground in a town or in your business, your business,
just in business for Tanbark.
Yes,
for industrial breaking ground in a town. Yeah, I haven't even really thought about that, but yes, you have to find a place that's actually going to be accepting of the business itself. And so some of these old pulp and paper sites are being redeveloped. The town wants them. Look, the tree is, I think these communities in Maine are special in this way. We are so forested as a state, and we have such a long history and a legacy of utilizing the forest for economic opportunity. But those people also hunt in those forests, they fish in those forests, they recreate in those forests. So they understand, I think, inherently how you have to protect them while you're also utilizing them. It's almost like, if I'm going to get a little bit Pollyannish, it's almost like they're really good stewards of it, but also understand how much it is a part of their community. And so I think that if you were to bring this kind of business, if you're going to bring this, I wonder if you're going to bring this kind of business where you're saying we're creating jobs out of something that which is from trees in the forest. I wonder if that would get the NIMBYism that you see in other places.
Yeah, get it back. I think just coming to me, talking to you here is we need an iteration, a rethink on our definition of stewardship.
Yes.
The way you describe stewardship of the forest and the way sort of your average no person thinks of oh my God, they cut down a tree.
Totally. Yes.
No. Yes, I cut them and then they grew, and then I cut them and then they grew, and each time they sucked carbon back in. This concept of doing sort of immediate harm to the postcard in the name of a more complex relationship that is both economic and environmental is what Maine needs.
Have you ever read Aldo Leopold, The Sand Country Almanac?
The Sand Country?
Yeah, The Sand Country Almanac. It really, I left a really well-compensated career to do this, right? And we've taken a lot of personal financial risk. Sometimes I wonder what the hell I was thinking. Like, it feels just crazy and irresponsible. But I read that book and it just gave me a backbone. And he's talking about the first, one of the, big extinction phases and all that. So it is interesting to read it in that way. But he talks about how we have to, and it was written, in the 20s or 30s. And he's talking about how we have to treat the aspects of nature, the forest, the animals, everything as parts of the community. And when you look at it that way, you don't think of it as we need to preserve it and keep it stuck. We have to help it survive in this type of environment. And I would say you're starting to see a little bit where, like, certain environmental groups are starting to say, no, we actually need to log the White Mountains because we need to actually turn that forest over, but also we need to provide jobs for people in these communities.
Right.
So
Nobody ever entrenched their way out of any crisis. You don't.
no, that's called
You know,
stagnation.
yeah, and I think that the quaintness addiction that is so easy to have in this quaint place, this beautiful place, can somehow sometimes unserved can unintentionally harm us, and
Well, and
we'll
you talk
figure out a
about
way to.
quaint. What's quaint about driving through a dead downtown? So it's also
Right? Yeah,
give this
it's not
community a
quaint.
chance to thrive. It's
Yeah.
not quaint, it's
How many
depressing.
years have the fuel tanks been empty in South Portland? That's not quaint.
Right. No,
Why aren't
that's
those
not quaint.
condos and why aren't there
Yes.
drone ferries going back and forth between bathhouses and bars? I mean, holy
Totally.
mackerel!
Yeah.
I agree.
I was just saying
That is
that this weekend.
carcass downtowns are not quaint.
They are not quaint. And so the more we can find ways to so part of, when I started Tanbark, I was like, this is for the environment. I've always been someone who wasn't like a diehard climate person, but I have always, since I've been young, distressed about climate change, like at a deep level. And I was like, you know what? I have it right. And I was like, I have a chance here with the family that I married into and their knowledge and my skill set. I have the chance to actually do something about this. So I'm going to try. But I didn't realize how much more passionate I would become. I'm still passionate about the climate effect and getting rid of plastic, but the upward economic mobility that something like Tanbark or LaCasse and Weston might offer to the rural communities is actually the passion project for me right now. It's an incredibly interesting problem to solve and nut to crack, but it's something that I do think is possible, and you just need people to say yes to doing that. So,
Well, Melissa LaCasse, public radio person from New York City, married to pulp manipulation magnate from the northern sticks of Maine. You are the future of Maine, the sensitive, thoughtful, but cut the shit down and build the next thing entrepreneur. Thank you very much for joining us here at Maine for Keep.
thanks, Jonathan. I'm so happy to be on, and hopefully I get to come back someday to talk about our progress.
You bet. Thanks for tuning in to Maine for Keeps. I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to follow us on social media, click and share with your friends, or get on to mainforkeeps.com. If you have ideas for new content or podcast guests, or if you'd like to give us some money to support the effort, be sure to click and send. We're at team@mainforkeeps.com, and I'm at jb@mainforkeeps.com. Thanks. See you soon.